talk about South Africa's food crisis, properly this time, not the way the politicians have been talking about it, fully. And we need to start with spaza shops. Every year, South Africans get sick and sometimes die from bad food. And every year, particularly when children die tragically from eating food from spaza shops, South Africa is rightfully outraged. We're there again now. In the last month, 6 children from Naledi in Soweto died, seemingly from eating snacks from a local spaza shop that may have accidentally contaminated its food when using cheap poison against insects and rats. And every year, when foreign-owned spaza shops are identified as selling bad food, immigration debate starts up again. Politicians pile on. Some make legitimate points about health and safety. Others let xenophobia rip. And every year, guys, I think to myself, okay, maybe this time something will change. Maybe this year's tragedies are so bad that the government will act decisively to reform our food sector. And every year, they don't. And another thing that happens every year when children get sick and everyone gets rightfully outraged about how this can happen, another thing happens. Our political elites completely miss the deeper crisis that South Africa faces, the crisis that causes people to buy from informal traders and spaza shops, even though they know the food might be risky to eat. Our political elites refuse to talk about the real issue that needs to be resolved because it's a problem of their making and requires massive, radical action to correct. So tonight, let's talk about this because this underlying crisis needs to be tackled head on. If it isn't, people are going to keep getting sick and sometimes dying every single year. The cycle will continue. The underlying crisis will not be dealt with. That underlying crisis is food insecurity. So strap in. There aren't going to be many jokes in this piece for a while, but that's fine because we're here to talk about what actually matters in South Africa, even when there's not a lot of light in it. So we're going to answer 3 questions tonight. What is the true state of South Africa's food crisis? How did we end up here, and what can we do about it? And let's start with what is actually going on in food across South Africa today, because I think many people really don't understand. They don't know the state of the nation. Don't panic. There are going to be some stats. I know you can handle it. I believe in you. The Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC, did a massive survey on food security and nutrition from 2021 until 2023. If your household is food secure by definition and has food security, it means it has enough reliable access to enough affordable, nutritious food for everyone to eat well. The HSRC found that only 36.5% of households in South Africa are food secure, guys. That's less than 4 in 10 households. Now, as we will learn, that doesn't mean that everyone else is starving, but it's not great. And so the HSRC defines 3 kinds of food insecurity: mild, moderate, and severe. I know it sounds like Nando's. It's kind of like that. Mildly food insecure households worry about not having enough food and sometimes have to eat not great food because they can't afford the food they prefer, but they don't really need to cut back or eat bad food ever. 19.3% of South African households are mildly food insecure. Think of them as lemon and herb. So if we add together the food secure households and the mildly food insecure households, we get 55.8%. Just over half of South African households are doing okay food-wise. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me? Yeah. Good. So I just want to say that is crazy. That leaves 45.2%, nearly half of the households in this country, properly food insecure. And as I said, I don't want to overdose you with stats, but this is very important to understand what's going on. And this is where it gets heavy, but we need to know about it. 26.7% of households in our country are moderately food insecure. This means they often eat low-quality, undesirable food that is not good or nutritious, and occasionally they skip meals because they don't have the money. That's 1 in 4 homes where people are not getting enough food or good food. And that leaves 17.5% of South African households that are severely food insecure. What that means is, broadly, severely food insecure homes often miss meals, often run out of food, often go to bed hungry, often go a whole day and a night, 24 hours without eating. When your dad tells you to finish your dinner because there are kids starving in Ethiopia, he should be saying there are kids starving in South Africa. Many kids. Nearly 1 in every 5 households in South Africa is severely food insecure. Do you get it now? Do you get what is actually going on? Because I know it's hard to see when it's food. We only really know the daily eating experiences of people we see in our own lives. But this is truly what's going on. Estimates count the number of South Africans who experience hunger daily at over 9 million people, guys. That's way more than the number of people who enjoyed Sundowns destroying Kaizer Chiefs this weekend. Unsurprisingly, within this catastrophe, there is a mental health crisis. Food insecure people are much more likely to experience anxiety and depression. And also, within this catastrophe, there is child malnutrition. You know how we all like to laugh about South African men being short? Now, it's actually quite deep. I'm considered tall in South Africa. I'm 6'1" and absolutely sober in this picture, I promise you. I'm 6'1", 185 centimeters. But in many countries in the world, I'd just be a little bit above average, just a little. Unremarkable. And look, I'm not going to play in the NBA, but in South Africa, I'm taller than the vast majority of people I meet. One extraordinary blessing that I got when I was young was good nutrition and food security in my home. Human physique is significantly governed by genetics, but how much one grows is also significantly affected by how one is fed and raised, particularly in the first 5 years we're alive. Food insecurity means malnourishment. Children who get malnourished when they're very young have physical and mental development limited and get increased risk of chronic diseases. The D.G. Murray Trust said it like this, quote, "Children who do not get enough food they need to grow may well become stunted, which means they are too short for their age and their brain development may be affected. Stunted children are more likely to drop out of school, struggle to find employment, and live in poverty as adults." Back to that HSRC research, they found that nearly 29%, nearly 3 in 10 kids 5 years old or younger in South Africa have overall stunting, which is scandalous, guys. And most of the damage done from early life malnutrition cannot be undone later. So, bleak picture. The truth is, we live in a country with more than enough food to go around, way more than enough food. We're a middle income country. But a good food sector that is unaffordable and inaccessible to millions of South Africans. So that's where spaza shops come in, right? Spaza shops crop up in areas where people don't have food stores nearby, or those food stores sell at prices that they cannot afford. Spazas provide food and supplies for people at affordable rates and without customers having to spend money traveling far to buy what they need. There are South African spazas and there are foreign-owned spaza shops. Spazas are able to sell food at much lower prices than formal sector food stores. And I'm not just talking about Woolies, guys. I'm talking about ShopRite. Spazas are able to sell at lower rates than that. This is mainly because spazas stock goods from suppliers who smuggle the goods into South Africa. They don't go through our country's ports of entry, or if they do, then they just bribe the South African officials at the border posts to get the goods in undetected, because the goods that are not detected, the suppliers don't need to pay import taxes on them. No taxes, no tariffs, just a bribe to an official or a small payment to a smuggler to get the foods across the border somewhere away from the ports of entry. Without the tax and tariff expenses, the suppliers can sell their goods to spazas cheaply and still make profit. And the spazas can then sell their goods cheaply to their customers. But when goods are not detected, they also don't go through the health and safety checks that all food needs to go through to make sure it's good enough quality for us to eat. This means that spaza shop food is more risky to eat. It hasn't been properly vetted by regulators the way that food and formal sector food stores is. It's like buying a Catronada ticket from a website which doesn't actually have a www in it. You just really need to go to the real seller or you don't know what ticket you're getting. Now, it's important to point out a few things here. Firstly, the vast majority of food that millions of South Africans buy from spaza shops every day is fine. It's not making people sick. That would be a terrible business model, and spazas would fail if a lot of their food was hurting people. Also, as we've seen time and again, as soon as a spaza is accused of making people sick, it gets attacked. It gets looted. Spaza shop owners obviously don't want that. And another important thing to remember is that formal food manufacturers get it wrong too, guys. The Tiger brand's biggest listeriosis outbreak in the history of humanity happened out of a factory in Polokwane. That polony wasn't being bought from spaza shops. But we need to remember it's far less likely that disasters like that happen when food is checked by health and safety monitors. Many spaza shop foods just aren't. And people know, that's the other thing. People know that spaza shops are riskier, guys. People know. South Africans are not dumb. But the millions of people just don't have any other option but to buy from spaza shops. After the last tragedy of kids getting sick, a few residents from Soweto were interviewed, and what they said was really, really important. One man named Sifiso said, quote, "I would starve to death if the Pakistanis were to leave for good. He gives me groceries not exceeding the 350 rand. And when I get my 350 rand social relief of distress grant, I pay him back. ShopRite will do no such thing." This is something else that spazas do. They allow customers to buy on credit. When you're surviving on very little money, sometimes unexpected challenges happen and you need to spend money on, say, medication or transport to a clinic or hospital or whatever. But you still need to eat. Spazas often allow their regular customers to buy on credit and pay them back later. Another woman interviewed after the tragedy in Soweto, Julia, said, "I hardly go to the mall for anything. None of the big shops will give you groceries on credit, but they do it because they know," that's the spaza shops, "they do it because they know we are residents in the area. We're not running away. I still don't mind spending the extra 10 rand. That's like the little, loan, top up that the spazas do, the extra 10 rand, because I get groceries much cheaper and save on the trip to town or the mall, which can cost a lot more." That's objectively great for millions of South Africans who need that help now and again. People on social grants, people without reliable work, people who are severely food insecure. So that's the bind that we're in. Does that make sense? Structurally, South Africa does not provide a way for millions of its people to access good quality, nutritious, affordable food. Spaza shops exist because people need them. And don't get me wrong, not all spaza shops are good guys. In many rural communities that are far, far away from regular food stores, spazas can exploit people. If you need food but don't have the money to pay for transport to go to a nearby town to buy groceries, you have to stomach, literally, no pun intended, whatever the spaza shop is selling. And at what rate, at what price they demand. If you run out of paraffin in the middle of the night and you need more, and there are no taxis driving to town, you have to go to the spaza shop, and that's where spazas often take advantage of whole communities. And I'm sure you can agree, there is something fundamentally wrong with a society that forces people, millions of people, to endure and survive such exploitative dynamics about something as basic and vital as food. There is something deeply wrong with a country that needs unregulated, unreliable, risky food to get by. There is something deeply wrong with a government and formal business sector that is fine with this situation. So, how do we fix this? Because we need radical, radical intervention, and we need it now. When looking for solutions, we need to deeply understand how we got here. So here's the second question that we're going to answer. How did South Africa end up this way? I know I've just spent some time explaining how things are today, but we need to go deeper to grasp how we got here. And as with most things, this disaster, it was created by colonialism and apartheid and has been allowed to continue by shambolic ANC governments. Now, I know you may be rolling your eyes sitting at home. I know. Either because Dan is blaming apartheid and you're sick of that right now, it's been 30 years, or you're rolling your eyes because Dan is blaming the ANC and you're sick of that too. Well, all I ask is that you hear me out, because it's not one or the other, it's both. It really matters. So this is something that isn't spent enough time on in the history books in South Africa, and for everyone who hasn't taken history in school, this is something you need to understand. Colonial governments forced black South Africans to work for white South Africans. That was the point. White colonizers needed cheap, exploitable labor. They did this in tons of ways, including slavery, which is not talked about enough in this country. We treat it as the thing that happened in America. It happened here. But here's some other things that they did. The British created what was called a hut tax, which meant everyone who had any kind of home had to pay a tax in the form of British currency, British money, labor, grain, or animal stocks. Black South Africans who had been perfectly happy farming and providing for themselves suddenly had to give away some of their produce or pay money, which of course they didn't have because they weren't part of the British currency-based economy. And the only way you could get money was to work for colonial organizations. Does that make sense? The hut tax was designed to force even people with plenty of grain and stock into labor. Colonial governments then added a poll tax on all men over the age of 18 that could only be paid in British currency, and this forced more young men to leave their homes to work to pay these taxes. There was even a dog tax, guys. They taxed anyone with dogs. They literally did that. And so black people had to go, do we have a dog or do we have food security? Which explains a lot about how our country turned out with dogs, if you ask me. This is exactly how migrant labor was created in this country. This is how they got labor for the farms and the mines. And this isn't ancient history, people. This was happening in the 1900s. I know it was before apartheid, but it was the 1900s. This was happening before the 1913 Land Act took away over 90% of South Africa's land from black South Africans and gave white farmers all of that land to use. And we as a country know a lot more and better about the evils of apartheid. We know about the Group Areas Act, the pass laws, forced removals, Bantu education. All of it was designed to disempower black South Africans, stop them from being self-sufficient, force them to work for very little money for white bosses. The best way to force someone to work for you is to make sure that they can't get by on their own. You make sure they can't provide for themselves, can't provide food for themselves. You make sure they can never make enough money to not need to work for you anymore. That's how South Africa's white wealth was built. And to you who say it's been 30 years, to that I say it's only been 30 years since that system ended. Only 30 years. Hundreds of years of that system. That's where we were in 1994. Fortunately, since then, the ANC government has made some huge steps forward. Particularly in the first 10 years, they did extraordinary things. Mass rollout of RDP homes, water and sewage and electricity systems in schools and clinics and hospitals in areas of South Africa with black South Africans that had never ever had any of those things. But in one very specific way, the ANC failed and is still failing. They utterly failed to make South Africa safe, guys. Tens of millions of South Africans live in fear of crime. Organized crime is cannibalizing our society. Petty crime happens all the time. The police have not secured our streets. They have not protected our homes or our businesses. Millions of South Africans are spending their money on protection rackets. They're being forced to spend money just so they won't be robbed. In locations, rural communities, and even working in middle-class areas of our cities, crime is stopping people from opening businesses, making money, gaining wealth. We need our neighborhoods to be safe enough that South Africans can open little mom and pop shops, little family cafes, little mechanics, all those small businesses that we see in other countries where it is safe to open a business in a poor area even out of your own home. It's all well and good for the government to have programs and subsidies and action projects to help disadvantaged people start their own businesses. But it means nothing if you can't actually open and run your business because of crime, or you need to pay a ton of the money that you make to gangsters so they won't rob you and run you out of time. So, crucially, greater food security, for us to get that, we need the police to get a grip and make our country safe. That's not negotiable, and it must happen yesterday. It should have happened years ago. Secondly, we absolutely need all food that ends up on any shelves to have passed health and safety checks from regulators. That includes spaza shops, all of them. Thirdly, we need to create ways for nutritious food to be affordable for poor South Africans. We need to. And we need to get radical, guys. There are many ways this might be done. We could consider cutting tariffs and taxes on vital foodstuffs. Of course, if we do that for imported food, it will threaten our local producers, and it would be better to give South African food producers the chance to provide cheap food. And if we drop taxes and tariffs, local producers may be outcompeted by cheap imports. So then, we need to spend government money to heavily subsidize local producers. Governments do various versions of this all around the world, but our crisis is so bad and is ruining people right now, today, that we should consider going even further. Maybe we should be funding food growers in communities across the country. Maybe we should be forcing all big food chains to sell a percentage of vital foodstuffs at cost price to poor communities, or make them distributed for free. They're already making a fortune off of us, guys. Why not? They can afford it. They're making a fortune off of us because of the way our food sector is today. Maybe they have to make mandatory donations of some of their products to a government agency for distribution, or give it to a reputable NGO to distribute if you don't trust the government. Honestly, give it all to Gift of the Givers, guys. Give it all to them. Give the whole government to Gift of the Givers. Imte Suleiman, lead us, please. Everything you do works. Let them distribute it. Maybe we should consider rolling out school feeding schemes even further. We know how much child malnutrition can affect people for the rest of their lives. And maybe you don't like any of the ideas I just said. Maybe you have other ones, and that's good. You don't need to take any of my ideas. But we do need to broaden our imaginations, people. We need to throw the doors wide open to all kinds of ideas that may help us solve this crisis. Because we deserve better than this. And frankly, I'm tired. I'm tired of living in a country where tens of millions of people are condemned at birth to a life of struggle. It's enough now. It's been enough for years. I hope that makes sense.